Good afternoon. My name is Muyibat Adelani, and I've had the privilege of working with the Diversity Advisory Board for the past 5 years. And we've had quite the journey with our annual meeting series. Last year, we talked about why it's important for white people to engage in the conversation about race in our field. Today, we're going to go into more detail about how. How do we create more space for this dialogue, and what can be done differently on all sides to make this more productive? I'm so excited to be answering these questions today with my new friend and our guest, Mr. Damon West. You may remember him as last year's presidential speaker, and he's back to give us even more. He has an incredible story of redemption from being a lifer in a Texas state prison to becoming a highly touted motivational speaker, best-selling author, and most importantly, an inspirational human being. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Damon West.
All right. So excited.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right.
So,
how y'all doing? Good.
As I alluded to before, last year on this stage, we had a panel of white men talking about why it's important for white men or white people in general to participate in this conversation. Mm-hmm. Why are you the one to help us continue that conversation?
I love that, man. We're just going to jump out of the gate, right? This is great. We're going to have a conversation about race, diversity. We're in a facility where they have paper straws even, right? We're we're really bucking all the executive orders. This is great. So I just have a little fun there. So why am I the white man to be having this conversation today? Look, my story is a story that has a little different background to it. As she had alluded to it before, May 18th, 2009, I was right here in Dallas, Texas, and a jury sentenced me to life in prison for engaging in organized crime. 65 years, which is a life sentence in Texas. Engaging in organized criminal activity. And I was guilty of everything, y'all. I was the ringleader of a bunch of other meth addicts breaking into houses all over Dallas. And after the SWAT team took me down in 2008, the jury got a hold of me in 2009, and I got sentenced to life in prison. And this was a total shocker for me because I didn't come from a background that I didn't know anybody had been to prison at that point. And right after this trial is over, they take me out to the courtroom and they put me behind this bulletproof glass and they told me to wait. A few minutes later, my mom and my dad were escorted in on the other side of the glass. And they're giving my parents one last visit with me before I go to prison. They feel sorry for my parents because I just got life. My father, he was in stunned disbelief that his son had just received a life sentence in prison. So my mom does all the talking. And she said, "Baby, debts in life demand to be paid. And you just got hit with one heck of a bill from the state of Texas, but you did everything they said you did, so you have to go and pay that debt to society. You owe Texas that debt, but now you owe your father and I debt too, because we gave you all the opportunity, love, and support to be anything you want to be in life." And she reminds me in this conversation about where I came from. I grew up in this little town called Port Arthur, Texas. Port Arthur is down in southeast Texas, where Louisiana and Texas touch on the Gulf Coast. It's a blue-collar town, refinery town. And my mom was a school teacher and a nurse growing up. My dad was a sports writer. Here's the important thing she's reminding me of. My dad's legacy that he raised us on, my dad was the first sports writer in southeast Texas to put black athletes on the front page of the sports page. Happened in 1971. First time it ever happened. My dad put a black running back named Joe Washington on the cover of the sports page, a high school senior at the time. People lost their minds about that. I mean, they would break my dad's windows, they slid his tires, they sent my dad hate mail, a ton of hate mail. When I was a little boy growing up, my dad made me read all the hate mail, every nasty negative word that people said about my father and my mother because my dad put a black guy on the cover of the sports page. But my dad told me this back then. He said, "Damon, I want you to read these letters because I want you to see what it looks like to take a stand and do the right thing." Because he said sometimes taking a stand and doing the right thing means you're going to stand alone. But he said it's always okay to stand alone as long as you're standing on the right side of history. A tremendous influence from my father. And, you know, I was a good student growing up, great athlete, Division I college football, had some of the best jobs, worked in Congress, worked on Wall Street, got hooked on meth, and then now I'm sentenced to life in prison. So my mom, in that conversation, after she's reminded me of the legacy that I came from my parents and how they raised me, she said, "Here's the debt you're going to start paying to us. When you go to prison, you will not get in one of these white hate groups, one of these Aryan Brotherhood type of gangs, because you're scared because you're the minority there. She said, it's not going to work, Damon. You were never raised to be a racist. You're not going to start that now. She also told me you won't get any tattoos when you're in that prison, so that's why you don't see any ink on me. But my mom said, Damon, no gangs, no tattoos. You come back as the man that we raised, or don't come back to us at all. She laid it down that day on May 18, 2009. She said, do you understand the debt you're going to begin paying to us? And I was like, yeah, Mom, I got it. But again, what do I know about prison, y'all? I'm a white middle-class guy in America. I don't know nobody's been to prison at this point. They take me back to my pod in Dallas County Jail. I got 2 months before the prison bus comes to get me. I'm frantically asking every guy that's been to prison before, how am I going to survive? What am I going to do? And every guy I'm talking to in there, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, they're all telling me the same thing. You got to get into a gang. You can't survive without a gang. They said the gang is going to be your family now, except for this one guy, this older black man named Muhammad. Now, Muhammad's what you call a career criminal. Muhammad has been in and out of prison his entire life, but he was the most positive guy I've ever met. I had a smile on his face everywhere he went. And every morning, Muhammad became my friend. He would come and check on me in my cell. So this one morning in 2009, he comes up to my cell. Time is running out for me. The prison bus is getting ready to come get me to go serve a life sentence. He comes up to me. He said, listen, I've been watching you, man. I've been watching how you're dealing with these knuckleheads and these dummies talking about you got to get into a gang. He said, don't listen to these fools. He said, do you want to keep the promise that you made to your mom and your dad? I was like, yeah, I do. He said, then let me tell you what prison's really going to be like. So he told me. He said, the first thing you must understand about prison is all about race. Race runs the entire institution inside of a prison. And he said, every race wants it that way. That's how prisons run. Everybody breaks off on their own racial group. He said, so when you walk in the day room for the first time, he said, you're going to see a TV set in the day room. In front of that TV set, they got rows of benches. He said, the first row is for the blacks. You can't sit on that row. The blacks have the number in prison. You're going into a world that's upside down from the free world. The whites have the least representation. So he said, don't sit on the front row. You get your head smashed in. The second row belongs to the Hispanics. You can't sit on their row either. You get your head smashed in there. He said the third row, if there's a third row, that's where the white folks sit. He said if there's no third row of benches in a day room, you sit on the floor. That's the way prison works. White people sit on the floor. He said, what I'm telling you is this too. When you walk in the door, the white gangs get the first dibs on you because you're white. The Aryan Brotherhood, the Aryan Circle, the White Knights, the Woods, you fight the white gangs first. If you survive the white gangs, now you're going to fight the black gangs. And the white gangs will work in concert with the black gangs to get you to go with your own race where you belong. But he told me, he said, look, he said, if you survive all that, and you can survive all that, you'll earn the right to walk alone. He gave me an analogy that day. He said, I want you to imagine prison as a pot of boiling water. And he said, you got three choices how to respond in a pot of boiling water. You can be like a carrot that goes in hard but becomes soft under the water, an egg that goes in with the soft inside but becomes hardened by the water, or a coffee bean that changes the water to coffee. And he said, that's how you're going to turn this thing around. You're going to have to be like a coffee bean. You're going to have to change the water around you with the power inside you, just like the coffee bean changed the water around it with the power inside of it. And then I went off to the Texas prison system, y'all. It was a baptism by fire. It was the hardest thing I've ever been through in my life. The first couple months of prison was constant violence. That's the one language everybody speaks in prison is violence. And when I got there, it was exactly what Muhammad said. I mean, I'm fighting the white gangs first. After I got through the white gangs, I was starting to fight the black gangs, and it was tough, y'all. And I would see my parents at visitation. They would come see me, and I've got these black eyes, and I'm banged up, and my dad's asking me what's going on, and I'm telling him about the race thing in there. My dad just can't wrap his brain around this because he fought so hard in civil rights, and he just didn't understand it. But he told me something one day at visitation. He said, Damon, you got to get out on the rec yard. He said, sports is the great uniter. He reminded me of that. And so that was on a weekend. That was on a Saturday. 6 weeks into prison on that Monday after that, I'm still fighting the black gangs, and I decided to go out to the rec yard to earn respect playing sports. And the rec yard's the scariest place in prison for me at this point. I live with the lifers. It's the most dangerous part of prison. But the rec yard was particularly scary because every sport was segregated by the color of your skin. Like the sand volleyball court was the whites and Hispanics only. The handball, all the races can play handball, but if you play doubles in handball, your doubles partner has to be the same skin color as you. You can't mix the races. The weight stack. The weight stack was the same thing, just like you see in every prison movie. Everybody wants to push out iron in prison. All races can lift weights in prison, but if you wanted someone to spot you or work out with you, your partner, your spotter, has to be the same skin color as you. The chow hall. The chow was the same way. You couldn't sit down at the table in the chow hall and eat your meals with people from a different race. Race was everything. But that Monday morning, I go out to the rec yard with the words of my dad in my ear. I'm thinking things like this when I go out to the rec yard. Before there was Martin Luther King Jr., there was Jackie Robinson. Before you ever integrated lunch counters in the American South, you integrated locker rooms. How many Friday Night Lights did I see growing up in Texas playing football? You look up in the stands, everybody from every backgrounds, hugging each other, slapping each other back, high-fiving and crying together. I didn't see that the other 6 days of the week, but I saw it on Friday nights. My dad broke the color barrier in sports pages. I knew sports would do it, and it did. Sports was the thing that made me whole in prison. It broke the divide down. Sports is the great uniter. And I believe sports is the great uniter in America, y'all. That's our melting pot. That's the only place. Religion can't bring us together like sports, because we can self-segregate religions in America. Let's be honest. Everybody does. But you can't segregate the sports. Sports is our only place where we come together like that. And that was a very big thing for me in prison. And after doing my time, I did 7 years and 3 months at a maximum security prison in Beaumont, Texas. The parole board comes to visit me. They want to talk to the guy that didn't just change himself, but changed the entire prison. The coffee bean. I turned the pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. And the lady from parole asked me in 2015, she said, if you could be remembered for being anything in life, anything at all, she said, tell me what that one thing would be, but give it to me in just one word. I said, useful. I said, I just want to be useful. And I could be useful inside this prison, or I could be useful in that free world finding more coffee beans. And the answer worked. They granted my parole in 2015. After 7 years and 3 months, I got out on parole, and I'll be on parole until the year 2073. So I got a little more time left on parole in Texas. I got about 48 more years. But pertinent to this conversation, when I was leaving prison the last day, the guards are escorting me off the prison. And this is a dangerous time. When you make parole, that's people's last shot to get you, man. If someone's got a beef with you, that's when they're going to get you, right before you get on that bus. And so as we're being escorted out, this guy is flying from on the other side of the rec yard coming for us. The guard gets on point, I get on point, but then I realize who it is. I told the guard, I said, hey man, that's my brother. I need to go talk to my brother. He's not my blood brother, right? But he's like my brother because of what we've been through. This guy's name was Sabor. Sabor was another black Muslim man from Dallas, although Sabor is my age today. Sabor is 50 years old. He's still in prison. Sabor was my old cellmate in prison, one of my favorite cellmates. We're like brothers to this day. I talked to him last week on the prison phone. He's going to be there a while. But Sabor's flying across the rec yard to see me. The guard told me, go say goodbye to your brother, but make it fast and do not get in any fights. So I run over there to go see Sabor. And Sabor is it's very emotional because I'm leaving without my friend. And you have a little survivor's guilt that you're going to be leaving and he's not. But he's happy for me. He said, man, I'm happy for you, West. I'm excited for your family. He said, but I need to ask you something before you get out of here. I said, man, you're my brother. Ask me anything. He said, when you get out of here, you're going to talk about what you saw in here, the stuff we talked about in here. What Sabor was wanting to know is was I going to discuss the things we saw in there, things I learned about social justice, things I learned about disparities in the system, things I learned about racism. He wanted to know if I was going to talk about the things he taught me about when we were cellmates, because I had to learn this from another black man. I had never lived in the world of a black man. But when I was in prison and I saw all these black and brown men around me, something was wrong in America, and I wanted to understand it. And Sabor was the guy that would teach me about the world he came from. And I was a sober observer. I was listening to what Sabor said. And on that last day in prison, he wanted to know, he said, are you going to talk about the stuff you saw in here? And I'm like, yeah, man, Sabor, let me get on my feet first, man. When I get on my feet, you know I will. And what Sabor said to me became a call to action in my life. His words hit me right between the eyes when he said, good. He said, sometimes they lock up the right guy. I looked at Sabor. I'm like, what do you mean the right guy, Sabor? He said, look at you, man. You're white, you're middle class, you're well-spoken. You got 2 parents waiting on the other side of that gate. You got a job at a law firm waiting for you out of prison. No one has that. He said, people will listen to you, but you were the right guy for this time. You're supposed to take this message out there. And that is why I feel like I'm the right guy to have this conversation today.
Thank you for sharing that story.
I'm a storyteller, y'all. I'm a storyteller, so my answers will probably have stories around, but I believe human beings have always learned from storytellers, right? Lessons and morals and principles, entertainment, so I'm a storyteller.
I totally agree. So with respect to starting these conversations, you talked about going out on the rec yard and essentially having to initiate a conversation that the system around you is not interested in having. How do white people go about starting conversations? What are the qualities that they should bring to the table when they want to initiate these kind of conversations?
Yeah, for white people, so first of all, it's very difficult for white people to understand racism. And the reason why white people have such a difficulty understanding racism is because most white people will never experience racism in their lifetime, because racism is the imbalance of power. And in order for racism to exist, one race has to have more power over the other races. This is what Muhammad is telling me when I'm in county jail. And he's telling me, in the world we live in out here, white people have the power. But in prison, he told me the power flipped, the power structure flipped, right? But that's the thing. It's difficult for white people to understand racism because they've never experienced racism. So if it's difficult for you to understand it, I think the first thing white people need to do is they need to come with humility. Humility is when we're coming in willing to listen and learn. And listening is so important, because if white people want to understand racism, we're going to have to sit there and listen to what black and brown people are telling us is really going on in this country. And that's going to take a lot of humility, because you're going to hear some difficult truths. But it's when we get into the truths, the nitty gritty of it, that we can begin to understand what the real problem is and start coming up with solutions. But I think it's so important for us to have the conversations. We have to have these. In America right now, I joked around about the paper straws and all the executive orders, right? But in America right now, we're not having any conversations about this, and we need to have conversations about this, because our strength in this country is in our diversity. But if we stop talking, nothing happens. My dad grew up in a generation that he loved All in the Family. You ever seen All in the Family?
Yeah.
Great TV show, right? But my dad told me, he said, Damon, this is recently, he was telling me, he said, you couldn't make All in the Family today, right? Blazing Saddles was one of his favorite movies. You couldn't make Blazing Saddles today. Richard Pryor wrote most of that. But he said the thing about All in the Family that really struck him is that Archie and Meathead, they never saw eye to eye. But you know what they never stopped doing? They never stopped talking. They never stopped having communication with each other. They never agreed with each other, but they never stopped talking to each other. And I think it's important right now for white people to go out and want to understand and learn, but that's going to take a lot of humility, a lot of grace, a lot of listening. And, you know, growth follows belief, you know. You have to believe in something for it to grow.
What do you think then holds people back from starting these conversations or even just participating in conversations? As I told you, we had this panel last year of 4 white men on this same stage talking about race, and we got a lot of flack for that. And I think a lot of people hold themselves back, I think, from engaging. What do you think that's about?
Yeah, I think it's fear. I think cancel culture has gotten out of control in this country. I think we've gotten we went a little too far PC. It kind of ran amok. And so I think it's fear. Here's the thing about being a white person. I'll give you an example of what white people tell me. Damon, I'm afraid to go out and have this conversation because if I say or do the wrong thing, I could get canceled for it. And you know, that's a problem. Because the comfortable thing where no growth takes place is to sit back on the sidelines and just watch and just let things happen around you because it's not dangerous on the sideline. But here's what I think has to happen. If we're going to have these conversations, if white people are going to start coming out and with humility and being willing to listen and learn, then it's going to take a lot of people that are black and brown being willing. And that's what I had. I had the advantage of that. I had people that invested in me, Muhammad, Sabor, all these people throughout my life invested in me, and I was willing to learn, but they had to be willing to teach. And that's the element right now we have. But so many white people that I know are afraid because cancel culture has got out of control. Cancel culture is a terrible thing. Whether it comes from the right or the left, it stifles conversation, it stifles growth, it stifles innovation. We've got to get rid of the cancel culture, but that's up to us to do that because cancel culture only has power if you give it the power.
Totally agree. I think going back to your point about teaching, Something that comes up in my friend group is, I'm really tired of teaching. Why should I have to be the one to do that? And I admit myself, I sometimes struggle with being gracious to my white peers who just want to learn. Why is extending grace so hard?
Oh man, this is a great question. Grace is hard. Grace is difficult. Grace always costs the person who gives it more than it costs the person who receives it. And that's why grace is hard. Because when you give someone grace, you've got to give more of yourself than that person's going to receive by getting your grace, right? And if I can only imagine, I've never been a black person in America, but if you're a black person in America, you've got to be beat down at this point by all the times you've given grace and you've seen nothing come back in return. But if we're going to make this work, if we're going to make this happen in America, white people are going to have to come with humility, and black and brown people are going to have to be coming with grace. And humility and grace, when they come together, can make some pretty incredible things happen. But it's going to take all of us working together, because every black person I've ever talked to, they've told me the same thing. We're not looking for a white savior. We don't want you to fix this stuff. We don't want you to come in there and try to fix everything. But what I've heard from my black friends is that we do want you to help us with the power that you have. And if we agree that white people really do have the power in this country, and I believe they do, then we need to find a way as white people to shift some of our power into those communities and help them grow. Not fix it for them, because I don't want the white savior, but shift the power back into the communities that need the help that we can use from. And that's on us. We can do that.
Let's go back to the point you're making about the combination of grace and humility. What happens when those two things come together inside of one conversation?
Y'all, like I said, I'm a storyteller. So my dad told me a story. He was a sports writer for 50 years. He told me that, he said in the late 60s, he asked me about who do you think the biggest person was in civil rights in the 60s? And of course, I was talking about Kennedy, the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. You got to throw Lyndon Johnson in there, and whatever Lyndon Johnson's real motives were. I mean, he was still there for the big things that happened in 65. But he said, no, you're wrong. He said the biggest influence on civil rights in America was Bear Bryant. And I'm like, what do you mean, Bear Bryant? If you think back to this game that was played between the University of Alabama and USC, there's a big game that was played. Bear Bryant went out and sought USC to come into Tuscaloosa, Alabama, because Bear Bryant knew the future was going towards black athletes being in college football. And in the state of Alabama, you couldn't recruit black athletes. So he put USC on the schedule in Tuscaloosa, worked in concert behind the scenes with the head coach at USC. They went and played a round of golf. They had a conversation about it. Hey, we're sitting on the precipice right here. We need to use our power to bring this together. We can help the civil rights movement in America, and in sports. Sports can bring people together. And he brings USC in there, and USC clobbers Alabama. And that is when Alabama started having black players on their team. And once Alabama did it, everybody could do it. So grace and humility, for that to happen, there had to be a lot of people that bought into what Bear Bryant was doing and what the coach at USC was doing too. But more and more conversations started happening after that. And that's when my dad said civil rights started taking off more, because sports played a big role in it.
One of the other things you pointed out that I wanted to talk about is the fact that extending grace requires you to accept that nothing may happen in return. And I think that's what exhausts so many of us, especially me and my peers, when we hear that. What do you think is behind people who are willing to be graceful in those situations? What do you think Muhammad, for instance, had inside of him that allowed him to give someone like you grace?
Very, very good question. And I don't think I've ever told you this story. Whenever I ran into Muhammad in Dallas County Jail, 2009, you got to understand the dynamic that we're in, where he's a black man, I'm a white man. He's Muslim, I'm Catholic. He's older, I'm younger. Everything inside that world says that we're not supposed to be having a conversation together, let alone he's going to mentor me through this process and give me the tools I need to get through it. I didn't know Muhammad's backstory. He told me a little bit about it. What he told me in Dallas County Jail, we talked about race and stuff like that. He said, He said that it was in the late 50s. They had the white and black water fountains, the colored water fountains, white water fountains. He said one day his friends put him up to a dare to go drink out of the white water fountain. And so they're a couple hundred yards away. He does it. He runs over there. He drinks out of the white water fountain. He runs back and he's exhausted. And his mom was coming out of the house, and his mom beat him that day for doing that. And I asked him, I said, did the water taste any different? He said, no, the water didn't taste any different, but it's power. The water was different because of the power structure involved in it. Here's what I didn't know about Muhammad until later in life when I found him. And I'll talk about finding him in a little bit, but I did find Muhammad when I got out. Muhammad grew up in South Dallas, very all-black part of South Dallas. When he was 9 years old, I think he grew up Lutheran, is what his sisters told me. There was a new pastor that came into his church. It was a white man. And this white man brought his white family, and then other white families started joining their church. So they had the only integrated church in South Dallas. Muhammad's mother had a boarding house, and the boarding house was for black families that couldn't afford to get their own housing. But they also took in white families that were too poor to live in the poor white parts of Dallas. Muhammad grew up when he was a little boy playing with white families, white kids and white families, going to church and worshiping around other white people. And his sisters really feel like there's no doubt that had an influence on his life, why he wanted to help me, because the sisters felt like God was working on him 50 years before he met me for when he was going to meet me in Dallas County Jail. So we're a product of our environments is what I'm trying to say. Muhammad came from an environment where he was raised pretty much like me. We're a family that said, hey, look, we're going to see people for who they are, not what color they are. That's one of the reasons I think Muhammad helped me. Muhammad knew about my dad, and he really dug what my dad did back in the 70s when it was hard to do. My dad took tough stances like that. It was very difficult for my dad to do that, and Muhammad respected that too. But I think a lot of it has to come with how we're raised. But we don't have to stay, if you're not raised that way, you don't have to stay in that mold. You can break out of that mold.
We've talked about humility, we've talked about grace. Where does vulnerability fit into all of this?
Oh my God. Vulnerability. First of all, vulnerability gets a bad rap. Vulnerability is a strength. It's not a weakness. But when you can be vulnerable and you let your guard down, that's when you can bring other people into a conversation. Andy Reid, the coach for the Chiefs, he's a good friend of mine. Andy Reid coined the phrase, America needs a locker room. Now, Patrick Mahomes is given the credit for it because he says it in the locker room one day, but Andy had a team meeting one time and he tells them, America needs a locker room. Y'all, the locker room, and the reason why I keep going back to sports, because I think for this conversation, sports is our great uniter in this country. I keep wanting to go back to that. In a locker room, all these people from a team come together, and all these people have the same goals, right? Your success is my success is yours. And in a locker room, a mistake doesn't necessarily make you a mistake. There's always a way to become whole in a locker room. And in a locker room of a team that wins championships, vulnerability is one of the key ingredients in there, because you have to be your most base self in front of all these people. You have to be willing to fail over and over again in front of all these people, and all these people are going to pick you up. With vulnerability also has to come belief and trust in the other people. That's why it's so hard. That's to answer your question. I believe vulnerability is so hard because you have to trust the other person on the other side has good intentions too, and they're going to follow through with what you're trying to do. So I get it, Muyibat. I know how hard it is to be vulnerable and let your guard down to do this, to show grace like that. And like I said, I've never walked in your shoes, but I know that in order for this to happen, you know, black people, brown people are going to have to show grace and be vulnerable and come back into the conversation, even especially after it fails.
Can you give us some examples of some conversations you've had that maybe didn't go well and what was missing there?
You talk about in regards to race?
Correct.
Yeah, I've had conversations before. You know, I've tried to go out and talk about race in America because I don't think there's really anybody that looks like me having these kind of conversations like we're having today. And it doesn't always go well. It doesn't, I mean, but I will tell you this, 90% of the time that it does not go well, it's from someone that looks like me. That's where it comes from. When I was in prison, the biggest flack I ever took from any of the people in there, the most fighting I had to do, the biggest tension there was, it wasn't from the blacks, it wasn't from the Hispanics, it was from the other whites in there. So there's a sentiment in parts of this country that don't want to have this conversation. And when someone wants to end up having this conversation, there's a lot of pushback about that. But again, Muyibat, I'm the son of my father who raised me to take tough stances. And I've been given this incredible platform. I'm a very privileged guy. I mean, you can look at my background. I mean, white, middle class, well-spoken, all the things that Sabor talked about. I believe I have to keep having this conversation no matter what the pushback is and the negativity. But I have rarely found any pushback from people of color, because a lot of times what I hear from them, man, thank you for saying what I've been thinking all these years, for validating what I've been thinking. But y'all, I went through prison to get to this point in life. I mean, I went through a maximum security prison. I had to experience racism for myself for 7 years and 3 months. I lived in a world where being white was no longer the advantage, where the color of my skin meant that I couldn't sit in a certain row of benches, where the color of my skin meant that I was going to get beat on the rec yard one day. For 7 years and 3 months, I got to experience what black and brown people have always experienced in this country. And it was ugly, it was gross, it was disgusting. And who would I be if I don't go out there and have this conversation and try to make more people understand? So no matter what kind of pushback I get, I'm going to keep having these conversations because I think it's important.
So I'm a firm believer that real change happens amongst friends, because you learn the hardest lessons from the people that you love and respect. And you, my friend, are known as being a change agent. What he didn't say about going out on the rec yard was the way that he made the change is he played basketball. He told you that he wasn't supposed to be playing basketball because white people weren't allowed to play basketball.
Yeah.
But he went out and played basketball. And the first day, I take it didn't go well. Maybe not the second day. No. But eventually, they let him play basketball. And I think examples of being a change agent are very important for all of us. How can we then go be change agents and inspire change amongst our own circles of influence?
Yes, I'm gonna use Andy Reid again. Andy's a good friend, and he's a championship coach. We can all agree the Chiefs are a pretty good team, right? They're good. I mean, they're not. Maybe they're not.
I don't think agree about that in Dallas.
Maybe they're not your team, but I mean, but they're a good team, right? Anybody that wins the Super Bowl or plays for the Super Bowl multiple years in a row, they're a good team. Andy Reid is a good coach by all metrics. He's a good coach. He's one of the top coaches probably ever in the history of the game. I believe the Chiefs are the kind of team they are, not just because Andy Reid's a good coach, but because the players in that team have bought into Andy Reid's culture. And when Andy Reid's not around, the players hold each other accountable to that culture. And I think that's what makes great teams great, right? Because a coach can't be everywhere at one time, but when the coach isn't around and these teammates are around each other, they hold each other to a higher standard. They pick each other up. You know, racism can flourish in silence. But if we're out there and we said we're going to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and you see a friend of yours make a racially insensitive joke, say you're a white guy, you see someone make a racially insensitive joke or post something on social media that has some innuendo to it, call them out. Hold them to a higher standard, because that's the way it's going to change. It's not going to happen in a vacuum. We got to call it out, and that's what we have to do on that, because that's on us, white people, to call that out. Leadership is a transfer of beliefs. And if we're truly going to be the leaders in this thing, we've got to believe in what we're doing and be willing to stand by it and have the difficult conversations where it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but growth takes place outside your comfort zone. That's the only way you grow. Nothing big ever happens in a comfort zone. What about?
What do you say we take some questions from the audience?
I'd love to. Anybody got any questions?
Please come up to the microphone. There's 2 microphones in the aisle.
Hello, thank you for being here. My name is Yusuf Sadiq. I'm a second-year medical student at Florida State University. I'm a 2025 Nth Dimension Scholar. And my question for you is that, as you said, you have to keep having this conversation because you understand the reality, right? But would you say that other white people that also do understand the reality are responsible or have the responsibility to reach the audience that other people of color cannot reach, or it's really up to them whether they feel comfortable to actually navigate and talk to the people that we cannot reach?
So I think that for white people we've got to get outside of our comfort zone. So I think take the word comfort out of this conversation entirely, because if we even have comfort in the conversation, I don't think we're ever going to have the conversation. But it's going to take us getting outside of our comfort zone. And that's different for everybody. I don't know what that is. And maybe that's just like reaching out to your, to one person and saying, hey, I heard a group of people talking today, and something really got through to me. And maybe it's the phone call you make after this conversation here today to a friend, and you say, hey, you know what? I want to listen. I want to learn what it is that, that I need to understand about your position in this country. It's going to require white people being proactive to do it, because it's not going to come to them. I don't experience it in my life as a white person that black and brown people are just running up to me and say, hey, let's have a conversation about race. Doesn't really happen. We're going to have to go out and initiate it, and that's going to be uncomfortable. You got to get outside your comfort zone. I hope that answers your question. I was trying to.
I believe so, and I actually have another one.
Sure.
So you also said that racism is the imbalance of power.
So
as we are talking with people we are close to and are like trying to illustrate to them the experiences that sometimes we go through that they just do not see even today, and they don't think that it still happens today, how do we portray the idea that if we are trying to get rid of racism or decrease the experience of like racist experiences, how do we show them that by equating having them on equal levels, we're not taking away power from white people, or we're not disadvantaging the white people now? Because if they are in a position of power and now we're equating, they will be losing some certain power. And at this point, they somewhat lose interest in the conversation.
This is a great question. This is a great question, because this is where the pushback can come from some white people. Like, hey, I'm afraid if I give them a little bit of power, them being whoever they're talking to, I'm afraid if I give them a little bit of power, I'll lose my power, and I don't want to lose my power. This is what I tell white people too. More of the pie for someone else doesn't mean less of the pie for you. Like, there's enough pie to go around in this conversation. That fear of losing that power is what's going to hold a lot of white people back from having the conversation. And the thing about it is, there's so much to go around that you don't lose that. I think we gain that. It's this philosophy I live by called servant leadership. Servant leadership is helping other people reach their goals, helping to raise other people to a different station of life. Because I believe that when we help other people grow, we grow too. Society grows around us. And it's a mindset, though, to see that, hey, if I give of myself to these to other people, and they grow, that helps everybody grow. That helps everybody. Because really, we're all in this together in this country. This is not a white thing or a black thing. This is an us thing. And we got to figure this thing out before it erupts. We're sitting on a powder keg in this country right now. But I don't think you're far off. Like, there's a lot of people that are afraid that if they give up some of what they have, they'll lose their power. And I try to explain to people there's plenty to go around. But the other thing is, too, I want to say on this is I go back to this thing that every conversation I've had with people of color, they're always telling me, we don't want you to be a white savior. We don't need you to fix this for us. But transfer some of that power back to the communities that could use it, because you do have that power to do that. But we don't need you to fix it. Let us fix it, but transfer the power over back to us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You guys are incredible in opening up this conversation. I love the locker room analogy. I'm here in Dallas, and I'm rooting for the Mavs. I just put a plug out there. But one of the things with the locker room is everyone's in the locker room because they have the same goal. The hardest part is a two-part question. The first one is, how do you create that locker room environment? And two, especially in a place like here, you bring a bunch of people together. A lot of people aren't interested in that conversation and don't have the same goal. How do you make it their goal, and how do you foster that?
You want to take it first? You want me to go?
You go first.
Okay. So these are great questions, because, look, we're in a room right now. Let's call this our locker room. This locker room should be full, right? We should have people like standing room only in this locker room at this event today. Thousands of people here, but our locker room's not full. We got to create locker rooms in America. A locker room is a place where you can come into and it's safe, right? The teams that win championships, I told you, they have a place called a locker room. You know, they come in there, it's a holy place. Your success is my success is yours. There's core values on the wall. We all believe in these core values. My good buddy, Dabo Swinney, the coach at Clemson, during the George Floyd stuff that was happening in 2020, I was in Dabo's office talking to him, and he said, you know, Damon, if we could bottle up what we have here at Clemson, these guys come here for 4 years, and these guys sweat next to each other, they bleed next to each other, they work hard, they cry, they fight with each other. For 4 years they do this. And in those 4 years, those guys are gonna find the best men at their weddings, the godparents, the godfathers of their kids. It's all gonna happen in that locker room, that magical place. He said, if we could bottle all that up and give everybody in America a chance to drink from that water faucet, he said the whole country would be different because they experienced the locker room. America doesn't have a locker room right now. And a locker room can be any place. It can be a coffee shop, it can be a restaurant, it can be a table having dinner. But we need to go out and form more locker rooms in this country. And that's on us. We've got to be able to do this. We've got to be able to find these safe places where we come together and we all have the same goals and we're all rooting for the same team, going in the same direction.
I think to add to that and to answer Dr. Chen's question, the other thing that championship coaches do is reassure everyone that there's enough here for everybody.
Yes.
Right? Like I think, using the locker room analogy, there's playing time. I'm not getting as much as somebody else, but they're able to neutralize that internal competition. And within orthopedics, I think that's what we would have to do to make this space a locker room.
I like that. I like that a lot.
So Damon, I have a question, and I'll just kind of push back a little bit about the locker room analogy. I think we do have locker rooms, and really in society, it's just that our locker rooms are social media locker rooms that are entirely siloed and insulated.
Yeah.
So how do you contend with that, right? I mean, a lot of your experiences were incredible experiences, but these are in-person experiences, which shape and change how we think about, people in our society, right? So nowadays, our locker rooms are online. They're social media, and they keep us further apart.
Great point. And this is the biggest problem we have in this country right now. The worst thing that ever happened to humanity was the iPhone. The iPhone destroyed us. And when it's all going to be said and done, it's going to be the iPhone that did it. And here's why. The iPhone put everything in our pocket. Internet, social media, all this stuff is in our pocket. You look at the trends of everything that happened in this country and around the world, 2012, 2014, it all starts kind of going downhill because we're not in rooms anymore having conversations with each other. We're on the phone, texting back and forth to somebody. We need to have more intimate conversation. And the other problem with the iPhone is what it created is a world where there's no one truth anymore. There's many different versions of the truth. We can't all agree on one truth anymore, and that doesn't end well. That's why I said when it's all said and done, people are going to point back years from now when there's probably no electricity to run an iPhone that, man, that iPhone thing was a terrible thing because it separated everybody. Social media should be anti-social media. It's one of the worst things that ever happened. And there's algorithms out there. I don't think anybody's ever thought about algorithms. Algorithms are made to have you interacting with people that believe in your echo chamber, and it keeps you locked in there. But we've got to put the phones down. I mean, the phone is one of the biggest problems right now. We can't have a conversation in America because no one is face-to-face anymore. Interpersonal communication is important. You're spot on about that. We don't have that anymore, and that's a bad thing.
And Damon, I think the other thing that the social media silos do is eliminate accountability.
Yes.
One is because of what you said, there is no face-to-face. I heard this quote that I love, it's hard to hate up close.
Yeah.
It's very easy to have Twitter fingers and say all kinds of things, but when I'm sitting here talking to you directly, it's much harder to do those things. And we sort of hold ourselves accountable, but also we surround ourselves with people in person that'll say, hey, that wasn't the cool thing to do.
Right.
And I think the problem with social media is you completely throw accountability out the window.
You absolutely do. And look, let me tell you something. I live in a world called prison. There's no way you would say to someone's face the kind of stuff that people say to each other on social media. You get your head taken off. And there's just not a lot of accountability out there in the free world where you get your head taken off when you say something crazy. So I agree with you.
All right, thank you again for sharing your experiences. Just from listening to you talk, I think you have a very unique experience that a lot of us could take from, particularly when you talked about going to jail and the world was a little bit flipped for you. One of the things you touched on, it seems like, was self-preservation in that system. Historically, we've done a lot of efforts to educate, but it seems from our perspective that people understand the system, they understand the power imbalance, and there's almost seems like an intentional effort to make it that way. From your learnings back in jail, can you give tips on primarily self-preservation and it's as a way to take efforts away from educating when it may be that the systems understand and intentionally doing it, how to preserve yourself, number one. And number two is like, make sure that you can achieve what you need to achieve in a somewhat hostile system.
Yeah, the system, you're talking about the criminal justice system, right? Going in there.
Just in general, the whole system. But we can talk about criminal justice and things like that too.
Well, what I learned too, when I told you a while ago, when I walked into prison and I saw all the black and brown faces looking at me, I'm like, man, what happened in America? Like, this is crazy, because I never knew about that world, right? And I had a sociology bachelor's degree when I went to prison, which put me on a different level too, because most of the guys I'm locked up with, their education stopped somewhere in junior high. So I started asking these guys in prison, I want to know who goes to prison in America. How does the system work, right? And I found out there were 5 variables I could identify about how our society works. And if you want to check the temperature of your country, walk into a prison. That's going to tell you how healthy or unhealthy your country is. And we are sick right now in America. We're very sick. But here's the 5 variables I can identify in range of highest to lowest, all right? So, and it may shock some of y'all, some of these variables. The first variable, poverty. Poor people go to prison more than anybody else in this country. The next variable was lack of an education. That's the second biggest variable that I saw inside a prison. The third variable was lack of a family unit. A lot of the men I'm locked up with, 90% of them, they didn't come from a 2-parent home like me. Some of them didn't even have 1 parent, right? So there's a lot of disadvantage already happening. Then the fourth one was race. And that's where you find more black and brown men in prison. Black men make up almost half of our prison population. That's crazy, because black men are only 6.5% of the population in America. Something's wrong, because 6.5% of the population doesn't commit 50% of the crime. And the last variable was the one that affected me, because the first 4, poverty, lack of an education, lack of a family, and race, didn't affect me. But the 5th variable is substance abuse / mental health. And that's who goes to prison in America. And that was the system that I saw. But that's not just the system of America. I mean, that's not just the system of criminal justice. That's the system in America, man. You look at all the societal ills we have, and it goes back to these things: poverty, lack of an education, lack of a family. We've got to rebuild this country from the inside out. And I think some of that has to be done with, we need to bring more infrastructures back to the inner cities with jobs. Because if you don't have a job base in the inner cities, then you don't have anything, really. You have to be able to recreate that. Education is going to be an important thing. But I think understanding these variables, like Sabor said, they locked up the right guy, but going in there and seeing this stuff in person, it gave me a better understanding of it that I never would have had by reading a book or anything else like that. I hope I answered your question. I'm trying to do it.
What was the question about self-preservation, though? What was this?
So I think it was a very unique situation you walked into. You talked to a lot of people prior to going to jail. So how do I survive? And I think there's a lot of people coming into orthopedics and just general, just trying to achieve questions say, how do I survive? And analogous to your situation, educating, I think if you would try to educate the black gangs, like, hey, listen, I'm a person just like you, may have not worked really, really well. If you try to go at an entire structure that way. You had a great relationship with Muhammad, which helped you out a little bit, but your first intention was, how do I survive? So the question is, self-preservation tips. Do you have tips for individuals trying to come in through a society, number one? Like, what would you tell them? How do you survive, number one, and then number 2, educate? That's my question.
How did I survive in there?
What would you tell, garnering from your experience, how would you relate that to, or communicate that to somebody else? How would you survive a system first before trying to educate the other groups? I think you're doing a great job of bringing awareness to what's going on, but specific to minorities, what would you tell them? Number one, how to survive this situation, number one first, and then number 2, let's talk about changing.
So I'm asking, what did I tell them then and there, or what would I tell them right now?
Yeah, what would you tell them right now? Yeah.
Right now?
Yeah.
All right, so first of all, one of the most important things about self-survival is positive self-talk. I had to learn how to not listen to myself and talk to myself. And I tell people all the time, talk to yourself out loud, because you're the voice that you're going to hear more than any other voice in your whole life. You will hear your voice talk to you more than anybody else. But I would always tell people, look, you have to be vulnerable to go out and get people to believe in you. Vulnerability is going to have to come into play. And one of the values I talked about, growth follows belief. Mm-hmm. You have to believe in yourself before anybody else is going to believe in you. And that's going to take some vulnerability, it's going to take some courage, and that's going to take a lot of getting knocked down and getting back up. But I would always tell people now, keep getting back up. I don't care how many times you get knocked down, just got to keep getting back up. Like Muhammad said, you don't have to win all your fights, you got to fight all your fights. And that's what I would encourage people, no matter who you are or where you come from. Keep getting back up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. West. Thank you for sharing your story with us today. My name is Desiree Ojo. I'm originally from Sugar Land, Texas.
Where?
Sugar Land.
Sugar
Texas.
Land. Yeah, I know where Sugar Land is.
I went to school in San Antonio, and I'm currently a PGY2 orthopedic surgery resident in New Jersey. And I just had a question about your experience playing basketball. It sounds like to me that was kind of like the first coffee bean into changing the dynamics for you and the people around you in prison. And I know we're talking a lot about active activism, having conversations, being vulnerable, talking with a lot of people, but it sounds like to me in prison, kind of passive activism was helpful for you, just going out there and playing basketball. And I'm sure it was hard the first couple of days and the first couple of weeks, but how can people that look like you play basketball, so to speak, out here in the real world? Maybe people who are a little uncomfortable with active conversations, how can they maybe passively make an impact where they're at, whether that's in school or in their career?
Great question. And yes, it was very uncomfortable going to play basketball with those guys. And it lasted for 6 days. I mean, like for 6 days. It's not 5-on-5 basketball, it's 9-on-1. Like, literally, remember, I don't belong out there, right? And so these guys are pounding, and I'm giving it back wherever I can, but I'm taking a beating. But on the 6th day, something happened on the basketball court. I'm out there. They don't even pass me the ball. For 6 days, all I do is play defense. I hadn't taken a shot in 6 days, man. It's like I don't even belong there, right? Because I don't belong there. But on the 6th day, that Saturday, we're playing basketball, the ball gets passed to me. Man, I'm shocked I got it. I shoot it up and I shoot a brick. I'm like, man. I get the ball passed to me again. I shoot it, I make it, and one of the guys said, "Good shot, West." I got my name back. I wasn't white boy anymore, you know? It's very derogatory to call somebody by the color of their skin. But after that shot, after 6 days, they didn't call me white boy anymore. They called me by my name. I got my name back. I felt that, right? And so in the prison part of the story, that was the thing. I had to get outside my comfort zone and do something that was uncommon to get to the goal I want to get in life. I believe that in life, if you want to do something you've never done, you have to change the way you think to do it, because your thinking is everything. And so what I think a lot of people that look like me can do is go into communities and help other people in those communities. And that requires getting outside your comfort zone. That goes into a neighborhood that you would never go into before. I found Muhammad when I got out of prison. Like I told you, I was going to tell you what happened to him. I found him, he was dead. He died of an opiate overdose in 2017. But then I went and found his family because I owed my life to the guy, and I wanted to create a legacy because of what he did for me. And I asked his family, he's got 3 living sisters. I asked his sisters if they would help me out with this thing. I said, let's start a scholarship in his name. We'll call it his name was James Lynn Baker II. That was his real name. James Lynn Baker II, be a coffee bean scholarship. And I said, I'll fund it. Every year for the rest of my life, I'll put $10,000 into a trust, and every year your family picks the winner, so that every year one little boy or one little girl that grows up in his old neighborhood gets out. They get a better chance at life through an education. That's my way to go in and help. I'm not being a savior, but I'm going in and helping out and giving some of the power back into a community that gave so much to me too. So I think it's going to require a lot of us going into communities that we're not used to going into and finding ways, how can I help? Just asking the question, how do I help?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. What is a final message that you would like to leave with the group?
Yes. No matter what we talked about today, I am so hopeful for this country, y'all. And I'm upbeat about it because we're Americans. We can do anything we want, and I think that the power to turn all this stuff around is within us, but we've got to believe that it's possible. And I would go back to Muhammad's allegory of the carrot, the egg, and the coffee bean. That in the pot of boiling water called life, we got 3 choices. Be like a carrot that turns soft and mushy and weak, or an egg that becomes hardened and mad and mean and angry, or be like a coffee bean that changes the pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. And I believe we all have the power inside of us to change the world around us. And if we go out there and everybody decides to be coffee beans, what would this world look like then?
Well, on that note, thank you so much for being here for the second year in a row.
Yeah, this is great.
And thank you guys for being here as well.
Thanks a lot, y'all. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.